Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. If I could, hopefully you can hear me. I think my microphone's on. Hello, welcome to Chatham House. I'm Robin Niblett, the director of the Institute. Welcome to this day-and-a-half conference entitled Taking Inspiration from Kofi Annan. Our shared humanity, the legacy of Kofi Annan. We are absolutely thrilled that you would come and join us for this day and a half of conversation where we're going to have an opportunity not just to look back at the legacy of Kofi Annan, but also look forward and be able to think of some of the great platform that he's provided for all of us gathered together here in London. I was going to say working here in London as well on the multilateral agenda, which he was such a champion of in his time and in his career. I want to welcome very warmly members of Kofi Annan's family. Nan, who's here, Kojo, Ama, Nina, other members of the family. We're absolutely thrilled that you would come and be with us today for this event today and tomorrow. I also want to say some very first words of thanks to the many people who've helped pull this conference together, because it is quite a labor of love to be able to gather together such a group with such diverse backgrounds and interests, but all united around Kofi Annan's legacy. And the first word of thanks I'm going to give is to Mark Malloch Brown, who will follow me up here to say some words of welcome himself in a minute. He was instrumental in conceiving this idea, making it happen. Obviously one of Kofi Annan's closest colleagues and friends. Mark's going to say a few more words in a minute about some of the other partners who've been instrumental in us pulling this event together and who are reflected here in the participants around this room. I also want to say a special word of thanks. I'm doing all the thanks at the beginning because I won't have a chance to do this at the end, to Natalie Samarasinghe and the UN Association UK. They're going to be, not only have they been partnering with us on making this event happen today, but also will be hosting a major public event to which I know you're all invited and hopefully mostly are attending at Central Hall, Westminster. And that will be really quite a superb event this evening. So I encourage you all to attend. And I also want to say some very warm words of thanks to the two main institutions who've helped sponsor and make this event take place, our partners on it, the Open Society Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I know Patrick Aspar is here. I think Mark Sisman's on his way. We want to say a special word of thanks to both of you. We would not have been able to pull together such a diverse group of individuals and participants without your support. Because really, as I said a minute ago, it's an opportunity to get a sense and do a build out of Kofi Annan's life and legacy. And in that sense, my last word of thanks is to all of you. You who are participating and all of you who've come to speak, moderate, and share your thoughts here in this room over the next day and a half. What we want to do is make sure that, as I said, we're not simply looking backwards, but we are looking forward. I think many of you in this room will have been touched personally at some point by Kofi Annan, beyond the family, that is. And I certainly remember my own first interaction with Kofi Annan in Geneva shortly after I took over as director of Chatham House. And we talked a little about what we're trying to do with the Institute. He talked about the foundation. And then he said, as we were leaving the room, and he has, and I've read about this from other people as well, this way of being incredibly personal at moments when you're not expecting it. And he said, can I give you a piece of advice as director of Chatham House? I said, well, yes, please, that'd be fantastic. He said, a leader should always remain an outsider for as long as possible. Now, it was a really astute piece of advice I've carried with me. Unfortunately, I've carried it with me for nearly 12 years. And I think it's now reaching its limit. So unfortunately, he's not around to give me what the next bit of advice would be. I'm going to have to work it out for myself. Just a couple of words as well before inviting Mark up here about the conference. It's on the record. It's being live streamed. We are going to take the best ideas that you come up with here over these next day and a half, and between ourselves and the UN Association, we're going to put together a conference report picking up the best ideas that we draw from the conference. I want to say a couple of quick words as well about the context. It obviously has not escaped any of you that the timing of this conference now falls bang on the same 2 days as the state visit of President Trump to the United Kingdom. This is going to present, obviously, some logistical hurdles. I was going to suggest walking to Central Hall tonight, but I think we're going to double check whether that's possible or not, whether you should be taking the Jubilee line to Westminster, which is probably the safest way of getting there, but we will have other comments about logistics later on. But I think President Trump's visit brings into stark relief the way that current changes in international relations will affect Kofi Annan's legacy for UN-led multilateralism. And in my mind, the way I interpret at least Kofi Annan's legacy, he thought about multilateral governance as anchored in two tenets. One, a shared responsibility for global challenges, and second, the centrality of the rights and dignity of the individual. And it struck me that he's always found a way to blend those two tenets in some of the most important steps that he took as UN Secretary General, putting individual freedom and justice at the heart of UN responses to global challenges of poverty and health. And I think the Millennium Development Goals, the UN Global Funds on HIV/AIDS, were probably two of the best examples of this landmark approach. And as I look back at it also, I think Kofi Annan's time in office as UN Secretary General was probably an era when the idea of global governance was in the ascendant, even if there were all sorts of interstate disputes and conflicts taking place at the same time. I have to say, just to set the scene from my perspective, I'd say today the idea of global governance is actually on the defensive. And some of the long-standing conflicts, but also this much higher level of competition between great powers is starting to undermine, if not overwhelm, that global agenda. And I think President Trump's visit is almost a metaphor for this conflict that's taking place at this time. But it's not just the United States and this administration that is taking an axe, you could say, to multilateralism, but also, you know, its big competitor, China, brings its own approach to global governance. It is one that seems to give primacy and a desire to give primacy to the rights of the state over the rights and dignity of the individual. And in that sense, we have a much more competitive international system that is challenging Kofi Annan's legacy from all sides. I would say, however, that I think we could maybe take heart in some of the more radical and transformative elements of his approach that, again, to my interpretation, sought to bypass state confrontation. And the Sustainable Development Goals are a particularly good example in this respect. To achieve the SDGs, whether it's in any type of complex problem solving, climate change, sustainable cities, the shift to responsible and climate-friendly production and consumption, we're going to have the private sector, civil society, and citizens actively involved in this process. And I've always thought of Kofi Annan as a pioneer of the bottom-up approach to development and human rights that the UN has kicked off and that we are all going to have to give our commitment to in the coming years, and that was really emblematic in his work after he stepped down from the UN in leadership against violent extremism and transforming agriculture in Africa. And I would say in that context, it was appropriate that the last time that he visited Chatham House was when he joined us to award the 2014 Chatham House Prize to Melinda Gates and the work that she had done, emblematic of civil society, to improve the livelihoods of so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So, you know, as we think about this idea of change perhaps being led more by people, by civil society, than just by governments, this idea of Kofi Annan as the kind of secular pope, as some people called him, I think embodied that desire of so many people for a new form of leadership. And I think what we'll see in the next couple of days is how we can take that style of leadership and carry it forward. And I'd simply say, as director of Chatham House, as we head up to our centenary next year in 2020, we certainly want to put some of his ideas about inclusive approaches to global governance at the heart of our agenda. So thank you again all for participating. Look forward to a really productive couple of days. And I'm going to hand over now to Mark to say some words of welcome as well. Thank you.
Robin, thank you. And on behalf of all of us, thank you to all your team at Chatham House for making this, I know, what's going to be a memorable day, 2 days for all of us. And also to Natalie and her team at UNA UK. This has been a great seamless partnership between the two organizations, and thank you all for doing it. But also, in addition to the two main donors, the Gates Foundation and OSF, who've already been very properly thanked, there have been a number of organizations that have been sponsors here, helped, or partners rather, bringing in speakers, helping us mobilize the audience for today and tonight, and most notably Kofi's own foundation, the Kofi Annan Foundation, but also the elders and the International Crisis Group, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, the UN Foundation, and AGRA. And you'll be seeing people from all those organizations during the course of the program. And Nan, thank you for being here with the family in great strength today. So thank you all for joining us. Kojo, Amar, everybody, Nina as well. I just want to start by saying that we're doing this in London because London was a very special city for Kofi. I like to think that whatever else is happening in our politics, we still are an international policy capital. Kofi came here early in his term and frequently throughout, and at the end, towards the end of it, to speak about his vision for the United Nations. And I remember being with him on one or two of those visits, and it was even more than New York, a city where people stopped him in the street and recognized him, and particularly amongst young people, there was just huge enthusiasm for Kofi. And above all, for the partnership of Kofi and Nan, who seemed to represent everything that was possible about that brief golden era in international affairs, their clear humanity, their tenderness and love for each other, but their tenderness and love for the world was something that I think was inspirational in that brief golden age, which, if you like, between the end of the Berlin Wall and the aftermath of 9/11, when suddenly there was an opportunity for the UN to inspire and lead and lay out a vision. And that was the world that Kofi took, or opportunity that Kofi took such an extraordinary advantage of. And as you'll hear over the next 2 days, across peacekeeping, peacemaking, human rights, development, public health, humanitarian work, but also beyond the world of governments, as Robin has just said, with business and with civil society and with other groups, there was just a massive outreach, a massive expansion of the ambition and purpose of the United Nations. And as Robin also indicated, you know, today things look very different. This is a time of cramped possibilities, of limited purpose for international organizations, which are on their back foot in a world of countries first, so well represented, as Robin says, by President Trump across town. But you know, what we want to do here over the next 2 days is therefore not just wallow in the memory, if you like, although so many of us here were great friends and involved in one or other aspect of his huge and ambitious agenda. But we also want to recover it because it's so dispersed. And you know, when I think of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga of Kenya, who will speak about Kofi's initiative in 2008 after he'd stepped down from office after the disputed election in Kenya. Or if I think Lakhdar Brahimi of Lakhdar, who I have to say just one little anecdote, that when I was head of UNDP, the administrator of UNDP, and I leant a little too far forward over my ski tips on something to do with Afghanistan, I was summoned to the headmaster's office, Kofi's office, which was bad enough anyway, because when Kofi, who was so rarely angry with you, was angry, it was, you know, particularly painful. And to my horror, I found there were two headmasters there, because Lakhdar was there as well, which made the punishment about 10 times as bad. But you know, Kofi, if he was here, would say that he too, like all of us, looked up to Lakhdar, the great inventor and intellectual of so much that we did in the areas of prevention and peacemaking and peacekeeping. And I'm thrilled that he, like so many of us, is with us today. And I know others who I've not mentioned will forgive me for singling out Ryla and Lakhdar in that way. So, as I say, Kofi, while ruling in a golden age, if you like, and leading in a golden age, nevertheless, even then, it was a UN of limits. And if I can end with a phrase I've used before about him, which was one of those African proverbs that he would summon up to distill and capture and simplify a complex theory of change or of how things must happen. He was fond of saying, you cannot change the wind, but you can bend the sail. And it was that extraordinary diplomatic skill in accommodating apparently contradictory opposing forces and finding a way through without betraying the fundamental principles that underline UN action. And that is the Kofi who we will celebrate over the next few days, remember, but above all, and if he was here, and I can almost hear him whispering in my ear, would demand of us that we think, but which bits of this can you carry forward? What is the agenda for the future? Multilateralism may be on its back foot, but it's not gone. Where do we find the next front foot? Thank you all very much.